Let the night wrap around you. Top of form. The quiet weight of the past. The night unfolds slowly, like a long breath the earth has been holding. Cool air drifts through the trees, brushing against forgotten doors and crumbling walls. A single candle glows in the window of a house that no longer remembers who built it. The world outside has quieted, the animals have gone still, the sky has closed its eyes. You can feel time soften, its edges blur, its hands unclench. All that once pressed against your mind begins to lift. The noise, the worry, the small unspoken things that cling to daylight. Here, none of it matters. The world has grown slow and gentle. Somewhere, a bell rings once in the distance, and even that sound feels tired. The air holds a scent of rain and ash, and beneath it, the faintest trace of iron. Every breath draws you deeper into calm, into the soft space between thought and sleep. The past moves quietly here, like wind over water, never asking to be remembered, only to be felt. Each century exhales into the next, carrying stories that have no need for names. You drift among them, weightless, unhurried. There were people once, farmers, traders, soldiers, lovers, all walking through the same dust you now breathe. Their voices faded, their tools rusted, but something of them remains, the echo of routine, the hum of work, the rhythm of survival. Tonight, we listen for that rhythm, not to awaken it, but to rest within it, to feel the world as it once was. Smaller, slower, closer to the ground. You might imagine torches glowing along a stone street, or the creak of wood beneath boots damp with rain. You might hear the low murmur of a town long asleep, its secrets folded neatly beneath the floor. And if you listen closer still, there is a heartbeat somewhere deep below, human, steady, unremarkable. And that is enough. Because history is not always written in triumph or tragedy. Sometimes it's written in the sound of someone breathing through another endless night. So breathe now with them. Let your own pulse join theirs. The centuries grow quiet. The light narrows to a single flame. And far away at the edge of that dim glow, a boy stands waiting beside a locked door. The key will turn soon. His story, small and cold, is about to begin. It began, as most things did then, with poverty. He was not born cruel. He was born hungry, into a house that smelled of iron and salt, where hands learned work before words. His father made nails, his mother stretched hides, and the boy learned to be quiet between the hammer strikes. When other children ran from blood, he watched it dry, noting the color, the way it turned dark like the river after rain. He asked questions no one wanted to answer, and silence became his first teacher. In a small village, oddness was noticed. One afternoon, an official stopped outside their door, speaking softly with his father, eyes never leaving the boy. He said, "He doesn't fear." And that was all it took. The next morning, the boy walked beyond the fields, following a dirt road that faded into mist. At its end stood a narrow house with no smoke, no garden, no sound. Its walls leaned toward the earth as if tired of standing. That was the home of Greor, the man who worked in shadows. He opened the door without greeting, only nodded once and turned away. The boy stepped inside. Behind him the fog closed like a curtain, and the village with its noise and sunlight was gone. Before him, the stairs led downward into stone. The air smelled of oil and iron. And somewhere below, the silence waited, the apprenticeship and the first tasks. The days began in silence. The boys swept the floor until the stone glimmered in the candlelight, wiped each table leg clean, folded cloths in careful lines. The room smelled of oil and cold metal. No one spoke to him. No one explained why the chains had to shine, why the ropes must hang straight on the wall. The only sound was the hiss of water heating on the small iron stove and the slow heartbeat of footsteps above. He learned quickly that curiosity was unwelcome here. At night, he slept near the stairwell that led below. The wood creaked as it cooled, and sometimes in the half-dark, a whisper rose through the cracks, a sound too faint to name. He told himself it was the wind, but the wind did not breathe like that. He learned to lie still, to let fear pass through him the way a chill moves through stone. The days became longer and his hands roughened. He polished, he carried, he obeyed. Grior, his master, rarely spoke. When he did, his words were short, heavy, unarguable. The boys stopped expecting questions or comfort. Each hour folded into the next, and soon he moved through his chores as if in a dream. One morning, Grior placed a large black key into his palm. It was heavier than he expected, cold even after the man's touch. Grior said nothing, only turned toward the stairway. The boy followed, his breath shallow, his body steady. The descent was steep. The air cooled with every step, filled with the scent of iron and damp earth. At the bottom waited a small stone room. Walls wet, ceiling low, torchlight trembling on the surfaces of tools he did not yet understand. The table stood in the center, worn smooth by years of use. A bucket rested in shadow. He did not move. Grior gestured for silence. There was no lesson, no explanation, only the quiet weight of presence. The boy stood and watched, feeling the cold settle into his bones. This was the first truth of his trade, to see and not react, to hear and not ask. When they climbed back up, the world above seemed strangely lighter. Grior spoke once more, almost gently. "No one asks," he said. "No one tells. You just keep it clean." And from that night onward, the boy never asked again. The weight of cloth and silence. The day he was given the apron, the boy understood he no longer belonged to the world outside. It hung heavy in his hands, made of dark leather worn smooth by years of sweat and smoke. The gloves came next, thick, cracked at the palms, smelling faintly of ash and oil. And then the boots, heavy enough that every step reminded him where he stood. There was nothing ceremonial in the giving, no blessing, no oath. Only the sound of Grior's rough voice saying, "These are yours now." He put them on in silence. The weight of them pressed into him like a new kind of skin, one that would not come off. When he stepped outside that morning, the air felt different, thinner, as though the village itself had drawn a breath and held it. The children who used to stare at him from the corner turned away. Their mothers pulled them inside. Even the dogs grew quiet when he passed. He was not feared like a soldier, nor hated like a thief. It was a softer thing, a careful avoidance, as though looking at him too long might invite something unwanted into the house. He walked through the market once that week, and the sellers spoke faster, eyes darting anywhere but his face. They gave him his bread without counting the coins. He thanked them softly, but no one answered. His new home stood close to the walls of the prison, half hidden by ivy and stone. At night, he heard the faint clatter of chains, the coughs of men below, the low hum of torches burning where no one could see. The sounds did not frighten him anymore. They were part of the air, like rain on a roof, like the slow shifting of wood in the cold. Sometimes, when sleep would not come, he counted the echoes, timing them with his breath until the rhythm carried him into a shallow, dreamless rest. He lived alone. No one visited. No one called his name. Once, a boy from the market left a loaf of bread at his door and ran before he could open it. He ate it slowly, grateful for the gesture, but he knew it would not happen again. In the daylight, he worked without instruction. Greor rarely spoke now. There was little to say that had not already been understood. The tools were cleaned, the floors scrubbed, the water changed. Each task was done as it had always been done, not for reward, not even for pride, but because repetition itself had become its own kind of prayer. There was comfort in routine, even when comfort was not deserved. And so the days moved gently, each one almost identical to the last, a line of still water reflecting nothing but the ceiling above. He began to notice small details he had missed before. The way light fell across the rough walls in the morning, the smell of the leather apron warming by the fire, the faint silver dust that clung to the boots after a long day near the forge. There was a strange beauty in those things. Simple, unspoken, steady. They did not judge him, they simply were. Sometimes he thought of the villagers again, their markets, their laughter, the sound of cups against wood. He remembered the taste of cider, the warmth of a crowded room, but memory was a fragile thing. Each time he reached for it, it thinned and faded like fog touched by light. He stopped reaching after a while. Life was easier that way. Easier to let the past settle beneath him like silt, to walk through each day as though it had already been decided. And yet there were moments when the world reminded him he still existed within it. Once, during a storm, lightning struck a tree near the prison wall. Villagers ran to help, shouting, bringing buckets of water. He came too, drawn by instinct more than duty. They stopped when they saw him, every face turning, every movement pausing mid-air. He could feel their silence pressing against him like the rain. A woman crossed herself. Another pulled her son behind her. He wanted to tell them he was there to help, but the words never came. Instead, he stood with them until the fire was gone, and when the smoke cleared, he walked back alone, boots heavy with mud. After that, no one spoke to him again, not even by mistake. His footsteps became part of the soundscape of the village, familiar, unavoidable, but never acknowledged. He was the figure at the edge of the road, the shadow near the wall, the presence people explained to their children, but never named. Necessary, but untouchable. Part of the order of things, yet outside it. In the church, prayers were said for sinners and saints alike, but not for him. In the tavern, where songs were sung about soldiers and kings, his name would never fit a verse. He was not hated, nor loved, nor forgiven. He was simply there. And still, the world went on. The river flowed, the bells rang, the seasons changed their colors. He repaired his gloves when they tore, oiled the leather of his apron, kept his boots clean. These small rituals gave him shape, a reason to keep rising each morning. Sometimes he wondered if Greor had once stood as he did now, young, uncertain, watching the same rain fall on the same stones. Perhaps every man who wore the apron had felt the same. Invisible, yet bound to duty, carrying a silence too deep for words. It was not pride that kept him there, but something quieter. A strange peace in knowing that he had become what the world required him to be. And so he remained, a living boundary between those who judged and those who were judged, between order and the shadow it cast. The apron darkened with years of work, the gloves grew stiff, the boots worn smooth by the weight of his steps. But beneath all that he was still human, still breathing, still watching the light shift through the bars of his small window, still listening to the hum of life that went on without him. In time, he stopped fighting it. The loneliness no longer hurt. It simply existed like air, like dust, like the slow turning of the world itself. Each night, before sleep, he hung the apron by the door, folded his gloves on the table, and placed his boots beside the bed. Then he sat for a while, listening to the quiet. The faint ring of distant bells, the sigh of the wind against stone, the pulse of a world that had forgotten him. And in that sound he found something almost tender, a reminder that even those left in silence are still part of the great, slow breathing of time. He closed his eyes. The dark accepted him without judgment, without pity. And as the last thought slipped away, he dreamed not of chains or fire or fear, but of a road lined with fields, a village far behind, and the soft weight of the dawn settling over everything that remained. The mathematics of pain. In the quiet room beneath the town, he learned that pain was not merely violence, it was precision. Every motion, every sound, every turn of a wheel had meaning. The body was a fragile equation, its joints and sinews whispering boundaries that could not be crossed. He discovered that what others called cruelty was, in truth, a grim kind of craft. One measured not in rage, but in rhythm. There was a balance to maintain, a distance to hold, an understanding of how far was far enough. To reach confession without reaching death required patience, a steady breath, and the strange intuition of someone who listens more than he acts. They called it pain math, a joke almost. 3 turns for warning, 4 for honesty, 5 for lying about the goat. He repeated the phrase in his mind, not for humor, but as a reminder of measure. Too little, and the truth stayed buried. Too much, and silence became permanent. His teacher never explained the rules aloud. Instead, he demonstrated them with pauses, with the slight tightening of a wrist, the measured click of a wheel, the careful tilt of a head that said, "Enough." It was a language that used no words, and he learned it fluently. The tools themselves had voices, i.e. the slow creak of wood, the faint hum of iron warming by torchlight. They did not demand anger, only attention. He treated them the way a musician treats an instrument, with precision and restraint. He learned to feel resistance through his gloves, to read truth in the rhythm of breath, to sense the line between pain that opens the mouth and pain that closes it forever. Over time, he began to understand that mastery did not mean inflicting suffering, but controlling it. The best work left no mark that could not fade, no sound that could not be forgotten by mourning. He did not see himself as a monster. He was a craftsman, the quiet worker of fear, a keeper of thresholds others refused to touch. When he cleaned the tools at night, he did so with the same calm as a baker kneading dough, slow and careful, letting repetition smooth the edges of thought. In the end, he did not pray for forgiveness or glory. He simply continued, counting softly to himself, letting numbers replace conscience, letting silence fold around him like a blanket until all that remained was breath and the steady, distant hum of a world that had long since stopped listening. Wages and rules. Payment came like the wind, sometimes present, sometimes not at all. On a good week, there might be a few silver coins, their dull shine catching the firelight like a small reward for endurance. Other times a bundle of turnips, a loaf of hard bread, or a single chicken too thin to eat. No one ever promised fairness, and he never expected it. The work was not the kind that invited gratitude. It was the kind people pretended did not exist, and when they could not pretend, they paid with whatever was easiest to part with. There was no salary, no parchment signed in ink, no promise that next week would come with coin. Just a quiet understanding that as long as the chains clinked and the doors below stayed closed, the town owed him something, however small, for keeping its peace. There were no holidays either. Festivals came and went, their songs echoing faintly through the narrow streets, while he sat near his small fire, watching the light move across the wall. No banners, no ale, no laughter. The job did not end when the bells rang for rest. It waited in the corners, patient and familiar, like a shadow that followed wherever he went. The villagers might dance for a season, but he belonged to another rhythm, one measured not in joy but in duty. He learned to take comfort in small things instead. The warmth of the coals, the sound of boots drying by the door, the silence after a long day when the air itself seemed to breathe slower. The law, they said, had rules. It forbade injury that could not heal, scars that could not fade. It demanded restraint and ceremony, witnesses and approval. But paper was light, and words even lighter. What was forbidden in daylight became permitted in the dark when the magistrate grew impatient, and the priest a little deaf. The rule was simple: do what must be done, and do not let anyone see too much of it. As long as the accused walked, or at least could be made to walk, out of the room, all was forgiven. They called it justice, though even the word seemed embarrassed to belong there. He once tried to ask for more pay. It was not greed, only need. The ropes frayed, vinegar grew scarce, the tools dulled faster in the damp air. He spoke to the magistrate in a calm, even voice, explaining the cost of his labor, the price of the things that kept their peace intact. The magistrate nodded with sympathy, the kind of nod that meant the conversation had already ended. When it was over, he received a single copper coin, bright, freshly minted, and a polite thank you for his continued silence. He kept the coin for a while, turning it over in his palm at night, watching how the firelight slid across its surface. Eventually, he spent it on bread. Bread went further than gratitude. The strange thing was that he never hated the arrangement. Resentment took effort, and effort required hope, and hope was a luxury he no longer carried. Instead, he learned acceptance. Not the noble kind, but the quiet, useful kind that kept his hands steady. He understood that every job in the world had its cost. The baker's back ached, the mason's hands cracked, the torturer's soul thinned. Everyone paid in their own way. His payment simply came in smaller, colder forms. At night, when the work was done and the town above settled into sleep, he would sit by the low fire and think about nothing in particular. The world outside continued. Bells rang, markets opened, lovers quarreled and made peace again. Life carried on without his name in it. And perhaps that was the truest wage of all, to be forgotten by the world he served, to earn a kind of peace that came not from joy, but from the steady quiet of a life spent doing what others refused to see. The end and the legacy. There was never a ceremony, never a retirement, never a farewell. In that line of work, endings were quiet by nature. The day one grew too old to hold the tools, too slow to keep the rhythm, too weary to bear the silence, there was no announcement, no procession, no final meal. A man simply stopped coming to work. The next morning, someone else would light the torches, sweep the floor, and continue where he left off. That was how it had always been. It was not considered strange. In the same way seasons changed, so did faces beneath the ground. No one asked where the old ones went, because the answer never changed. They went away, and that was enough. Griot left on such a morning, pale light creeping through a narrow window, the smell of oil and iron still hanging in the air. He said nothing, only placed his gloves on the table, the leather stiff and dark from years of use. The apprentice, no longer a boy, not yet a man, watched in silence as the old master nodded once, a gesture of completion more than goodbye. Then he walked out through the door into the fog that drifted low across the square and vanished. No one saw him again. No grave, no cross, no word. Just a faint memory of boots on wet stone and the sound of the latch falling shut. The apprentice kept the gloves as tradition demanded. They were more than clothing, they were inheritance. Not of pride, not even of skill, but of purpose. When he put them on, the fit was imperfect at first, loose in the fingers, heavy at the wrists, but soon they shaped to him, softened by heat, by effort, by time. He took over the room as though it had always been his. The same walls, the same tools, the same chair by the fire. The silence remained, familiar and complete. It did not welcome or reject him. It simply existed, breathing slowly through the stone. Days blurred into one another. There were moments when he thought he heard Griot's footsteps in the corridor or the faint clearing of a throat behind him, but when he turned, there was only the glow of the torchlight trembling against the wall. Sometimes, in the stillness before dawn, he imagined that the room remembered every whisper, every breath, every confession that had ever broken its air. The stone had absorbed it all, and now it echoed it back, endlessly. Not in words, but in the faint hum that fills places where too much life has passed through. That hum became his companion, his inheritance, his unspoken teacher. No one ever came to thank him, of course. No one mentioned his name in the market or at the well. Children grew up hearing the same story told in half whispers, that under the town there lived a man who did what had to be done. They didn't know his face, and perhaps that was mercy. He was less a person now, more a presence, a quiet rumor that made people keep their voices low when passing the old municipal wall. The townsfolk didn't hate him. They didn't honor him either. They simply let him exist, the way one allows a necessary shadow to stay on the edge of light. Years passed, then more. His hair thinned, his hands shook when he cleaned the tools, but his movements remained steady enough for the work. When the time came, and it always came, he would feel it, not as fear, but as a soft loosening of things. The world outside had long forgotten him, and he had long stopped remembering it. What remained was the rhythm of breathing in that stone chamber, the gentle clink of chains when no one touched them, the sigh of air through cracks in the wall. Life reduced itself to those small sounds, and he found peace in them. They said that when he too disappeared, the torches burned a little longer than usual that night, as though the air itself remembered his shape. The room waited, quiet and patient, until another came to take his place. And so the cycle continued, one pair of hands replacing another, one silence giving way to the next. No written record, no monument, no prayer. Only the whisper of work done in the dark, and the knowledge that someone, somewhere below, kept the balance that the world above preferred not to see. The legacy was not carved in stone, but in stillness. It lived in the weight of the air, in the faint echoes that never faded completely, in the unspoken gratitude of those who slept safely because someone else had chosen to stand in the shadow. In the end, he left nothing behind but silence. And yet, that silence endured longer than any monument could. It stretched across time, soft and endless, like a breath that never stopped leaving the body, carrying with it the memory of a man who did his work, and then, quietly, was gone. The life of the nobles, banquets and power. Evening falls softly over the castle, slow and unbroken, as if the air itself has grown tired of movement. The sky deepens into blue, and torches bloom one by one along the courtyard wall. Servants move in silence, their steps measured, their eyes lowered. The smell of roasting meat drifts upward through the stone corridors, mingled with the sweetness of wine and wax. Somewhere a lute is being tuned, its low hum blending with the rustle of fabric and the faint clink of silver. The night is preparing itself for ceremony. In the halls of the noble class, every meal is a message. The table is not only a place to eat, but a map of power, drawn and redrawn with every gathering. The Lord sits at the high end, near the salt, a symbol of purity, wealth, and favor. To be seated above the salt is to belong among the trusted few, those whose words carry weight beyond the meal. To be placed below the salt is to listen, to observe, to remain grateful. It is a world arranged by distance, from the head of the table to the door, from the whisper of the noblewoman to the silence of the servant. Before the first course is served, the guests wait in careful stillness. Each gesture matters. The arrival of the host is a ritual in itself. The slow turn of heads, the rustle of gowns as men rise from their seats, the deliberate moment before the Lord sits. Only then does the feast begin, and the hall exhales as though allowed to breathe again. The dishes arrive in a long procession. Servants glide like shadows, carrying trays that shimmer with fat and color. Roasted pheasants crowned with herbs, pies heavy with spices from distant coasts, bread baked that morning and brushed with honey. The scent fills the air until it becomes part of the music. To eat is to participate in the story of the household, its wealth, its alliances, its reach across the world. Every spice tells of trade, every cut of meat whispers of rank. But the banquet is more than appetite, it is theatre. Behind every bite is a conversation, behind every toast a calculation. The Lord raises his cup, and each guest follows in a wave of mirrored motion. To refuse is to insult, to drink too quickly is to seem eager. The wine is not the point, it is the choreography that matters. Eyes meet, linger, drift away again. Promises are made without words, favors are requested without being spoken. The language of the feast is fluent in silence. At the far end of the hall, musicians play beneath a carved archway. Their melody is light, unintrusive, designed not to distract, but to soften. The sound drifts like dust through candlelight, mingling with laughter that rises and falls like tide water. Now and then, a jester moves between tables, his bells faint, his grin practiced. His jokes are harmless on the surface, but the room listens for the tremor beneath. For in jest, truth can be spoken where politics cannot. A clever fool may survive longer than a clumsy noble. As the meal continues, the candles burn lower. Grease pools on the plates, wine darkens the linen, yet the hall remains perfect in its rhythm. Servants replace candles before they fail, pour fresh water before it's asked for. Their timing is invisible, their presence barely real. They are part of the machinery that keeps the evening smooth, unseen but essential. None of them will eat until dawn. Outside the windows, the countryside sleeps. The torches along the road sputter, and the fields stretch silent under the moon. Inside, power is being rehearsed. Words spoken softly across the table will ripple through weeks and months to come, alliances shaped, marriages arranged, wars avoided or begun. The feast, for all its beauty, is a negotiation in candlelight. Toward the end, a hush settles. The last dishes are carried away, leaving only fruit and small cakes, reminders of sweetness after wait. The host rises again, glass raised to the height of his chest, and the hall follows. The final toast is not for joy but for continuity, the quiet agreement that life, however uncertain, will go on as before. Cups touch, voices murmur, the sound spreads and fades like smoke. When it is over, guests drift toward the doors, bowing, smiling, speaking of nothing. Their words are fragments, safe, polite, meaningless. Outside, the air feels different, cooler as though it belonged to another world. Horses wait in the courtyard, hooves clicking against the cobblestones, breath steaming in the cold. One by one, the guests ride away, their laughter trailing behind them like ribbons unraveling in the dark. Inside, the servants begin again. The plates are gathered, the floor swept, the candles snuffed. The hall that had been alive with sound grows hollow, its echoes thinning into stillness. Only the scent remains, wine, wax, and smoke, the ghost of celebration. By dawn, even that will be gone. The room will stand empty, waiting quietly for the next performance. The noble who hosted it will wake late, his throat dry, his mind full of faces. He will remember the words that were said and, more importantly, the ones that were not. He will weigh the glances, the pauses, the order of laughter. In his world, nothing ends with the meal. The table is only the beginning, a place where the future is quietly set in motion under the disguise of pleasure. And so the great feasts of the Middle Ages went on, night after night, year after year, glittering with gold and fire, yet shadowed by the same human quiet, ambition, caution, longing, and the need to be seen. The hall would shine for a few hours, then fade again into stone, leaving behind nothing but air and memory. The court and its rituals. Morning in the castle was not so different from night. It only changed color. Light slid through high windows, pale and uncertain, carrying the smell of extinguished candles. The hall that had glimmered hours before was now cold stone again, stripped of its splendor. Servants moved softly, collecting traces of what had passed. The silver bowls, the wilted herbs, the spilled wine that left faint stains like forgotten whispers. It was the other side of luxury, the quiet labor that made the grandeur possible. For every lord who spoke under chandeliers, there were 10 unseen hands that polished, cooked, stitched, and carried. Their world was rhythm, not decision. They rose before the first bell and slept when the last torch died. Their footsteps were muffled by straw, their eyes trained to notice everything and be noticed by no one. A well-kept court was measured not by its wealth, but by its silence. How smoothly it moved without the sound of effort. The servants learned to read the moods of those they served, the slight tension in a noble's jaw, the speed of a glance, the pause before a command. From these details they built a language of survival, one spoken entirely in gestures and timing. Above them, life unfolded like a slow-moving play. Courtiers entered and exited through archways, each bearing the delicate armor of etiquette. To live in court was to understand balance, how long to hold a bow, how deep to bend, when to speak, and when to smile. Words were soft currency, gestures harder than gold. Every nod might carry a promise, every hesitation a threat. Even laughter was rehearsed, the sound practiced to seem effortless. To be born noble meant learning this choreography from childhood, to move through days as if each step were being watched, because it always was. Music filled the hours between duties. It was not the wild celebration of taverns, but a calm, ornamental kind. The hum of lutes, the sigh of flutes, the slow rhythm of drums that never rushed. Sound was a decoration, like embroidery on a robe, meant to shape the air rather than claim it. Sometimes a poet would read verses about love that could never be spoken aloud, and the audience would listen politely, pretending not to recognize themselves in the words. Behind the applause was always distance. In a world built on rank, sincerity was a rare and risky thing. Afternoons belonged to processions and councils. In long corridors hung with tapestries, noblemen discussed matters that reached far beyond their walls. Borders, taxes, marriages, and rumors that might someday become history. Maps lay across tables, stones marking territories the men had never seen. Servants poured wine, quills scratched parchment, and the low murmur of voices filled the room like the sound of a distant tide. No decision was ever final. Everything was postponed, deferred, softened into waiting. The art of rule was not action but endurance, the slow weaving of influence through conversation that seemed to say nothing. Outside, the world continued in simpler rhythms. Farmers bent over fields, children chased geese through mud, the market shouted and clattered. Within the castle walls, the same sun moved more slowly, as if time itself respected hierarchy. Even the light behaved differently here, pooling in corners instead of falling freely. The noble women stitched by the windows, their needles flashing in the pale glow. They spoke of fashions from other courts, of marriages, of music, of news brought by travelers. Yet beneath the talk there was the same patience that shaped all noble life, the understanding that one's role was to maintain, not to change. The evenings returned in repetition, each night a smaller echo of the last, each feast a subtle revision of the same performance. The guests changed, the songs altered slightly, but the meaning stayed constant. The world must appear steady, and its rulers serene. Even when famine crept near or soldiers whispered of unrest, the tables stayed full. Bread was broken, wine poured, smiles rehearsed. It was not hypocrisy, but necessity. To falter in ceremony was to admit that order could fail, and that was a thought no noble allowed to exist within the walls. There were moments, however, when the mask thinned, a tired glance between host and wife, a hand that lingered too long on a cup, the sudden quiet when a musician struck the wrong note. In those brief pauses, the air trembled with humanity, fleeting, fragile, quickly covered again by laughter. The court, for all its polish, could not erase the truth that it was built from ordinary hearts, wrapped in extraordinary rules. Beneath the velvet and iron lay the same need that moved the peasants outside, the wish to be safe, to be seen, to belong. At night, after the last guest had gone, the noble might walk alone through the gallery. The torches burned low, their smoke curling upward in thin threads. Portraits lined the walls, ancestors painted in stern dignity, their eyes following from the shadows. He would pause before one, studying the features that time had smoothed into myth. The resemblance was faint, but enough. The family line continued, the duty endured. Generations rose and fell, leaving behind estates, debts, portraits, and silence. The house itself seemed to breathe with memory, its stones exhaling the warmth of centuries. Sometimes he envied the servants for their simplicity, for the honesty of their exhaustion. They could sleep without wondering which words tomorrow would require. But envy was dangerous. He pushed it aside, returning to his chambers where a single candle waited. The flame flickered, reflected in the polished surface of the goblet beside the bed. He drank water, not wine, listening to the faint crackle of the wick. The night beyond the window was wide and empty, a darkness without rank or border. For a moment, he felt something close to peace, the kind that comes when thought grows quiet and the self dissolves into the stillness around it. In that stillness, all of court life seemed distant. The music, the rituals, the endless play of manners. It would begin again tomorrow, as it always did. But for now, in the hour between candle and dawn, the noble was simply another soul breathing inside the stone. The quiet legacy of the noble world. Dawn crept gently across the high windows, spilling thin ribbons of light onto the stone floors. The castle exhaled the night, releasing its quiet into the morning air. The servants were already moving, rekindling fires, folding linen, opening shutters to let the world in again. The nobles would rise later after the sun had warmed the chambers enough to make the cold tolerable. For now, only the echoes of footsteps and the faint sound of water being poured filled the space. In this hour, the castle belonged to no one and everyone, a brief peace before the machinery of ceremony began again. The rhythm of noble life was one of repetition, but within that repetition lay a strange beauty. It was a world built on detail, the curve of a cup, the fold of a napkin, the thread of gold in a robe. Every gesture mattered, not because it changed the world, but because it preserved it. Even the smallest acts, pouring wine, opening a door, placing a cushion just so, were part of an invisible architecture that kept the illusion of order intact. The great lords ruled through habit, and habit became tradition, and tradition became belief. Faith lingered quietly within these walls, though it was less a flame than a perfume that clung to the air. The chapel stood small and cold near the eastern tower, its candles flickering against damp stone. The noble would kneel there each morning, not out of passion, but custom. His prayers were measured, soft, like the words of someone speaking into fog. He did not ask for miracles, only for continuity. That the crops would grow, that the peace would hold, that the world would keep turning in the familiar way. The priests who served the court spoke gently, their sermons full of metaphors about patience and humility, virtues that fit comfortably within the slow heart of the castle. Outside, peasants might shout their faith to the sky. Inside, devotion whispered in silence. Art also thrived here, though often as ornament rather than revelation. Painters came and went, capturing faces that would soon blur into the same noble gaze. Musicians composed soft pieces meant not to stir emotion but to steady it. The walls filled with tapestries showing hunts, saints, gardens, and victories that grew distant with time. Beauty was a duty, not an indulgence. It reminded those who lived here that civilization had a shape and that they were part of it. In a sense, the castle itself was a song, built to impress, maintained to endure, echoing through centuries with its measured voice of stone and wood. Beneath this calm, the servants carried their own worlds. They spoke little, but when they did, it was with kindness, born from necessity. They shared bread quietly, laughed in whispers, sang softly while washing clothes in the courtyard. They were the unseen heart of the place, their labor flowing through its corridors like a quiet river. Some had served the same family all their lives, their names forgotten by those they served, their devotion taken for granted but deeply rooted. When a servant grew old, the castle did not dismiss them, it simply absorbed them, giving them smaller tasks, slower rhythms, until one day they too faded into the background hum of history. Sometimes, when the night was deep and most had gone to sleep, a servant might pause by the hall and listen to the wind. It moved through the corridors like a ghost of music, a soft sigh passing over centuries. They would stand for a moment, imagining all the feet that had walked those same stones, all the voices that had echoed there, and wonder if the castle itself remembered. Then they would return to their duties, leaving the question unanswered. For the nobles, age came quietly. Their lives did not end with battle or conquest, but with slow withdrawal. One day the lord found the stairs steeper than before. One winter the fire seemed colder. Letters arrived from neighboring lands, filled with the names of younger men rising to power. Time eroded not through violence but through distance. The world outside changed, roads widened, cities grew, merchants spoke new tongues. But within the walls the same patterns repeated. Eventually the lord would walk the halls in silence, his footsteps echoing where laughter once lived, and realize that his own life had become the echo of another's. There was no tragedy in it, only inevitability. The Middle Ages were built on acceptance of seasons, of birth and death, of the long slowness of life. The noble might stand at the window looking out across his lands, seeing the faint smoke from the villages below. He would remember the faces of his guests, the shimmer of feasts long ended, and feel neither regret nor pride, only stillness. Everything had been temporary, and yet somehow eternal, a circle of duties performed with care, repeated until they became prayer. In the final years, the castle's life thinned but did not stop. The halls still glowed at night, though fewer guests came. The tables were set with the same precision, though fewer hands remained to fill them. The lords and ladies sat longer before the fire, their conversations gentler, their laughter more rare. Servants moved slower, torches burned lower, and the sound of the outside world pressed closer, like the sea against an old harbor wall. Change arrived not as a storm, but as mist. Soft, persistent, impossible to stop. One by one the rooms emptied, the music quieted, paintings faded beneath dust. The next generation inherited, then the next after them, each repeating the same patterns with a little less certainty. By the time new kingdoms rose, the feasts had lost their meaning. The salt still marked the table, but no one remembered why it mattered. The rituals remained, but the understanding behind them had dimmed. What had once been politics became pageantry. What had once been belief became habit. The light of the old world lingered, but only as afterglow. And yet, in some small way, it never truly disappeared. Even now, centuries later, when wind moves through ruined corridors or sunlight touches a forgotten goblet buried beneath earth, a trace of that life returns. You can almost hear the echo of laughter, the soft hum of a lute, the murmur of conversation under candlelight. You can imagine the warmth of the hall, the shimmer of gold fabric, the faint scent of wine and wax. For a moment, the distance between then and now dissolves and time feels round again, soft and forgiving. The legacy of that world was not in power or conquest, but in its quiet devotion to form, the belief that beauty, order, and grace could hold back chaos, even if only for an evening. It was a fragile dream, but a deeply human one. Beneath the crowns and titles, they were all the same, people seeking meaning in ritual, comfort in repetition, and peace in the slow music of their days. When night finally returns to the old halls, when the last fire dies and the moon leans through the broken arches, what remains is not loss, but calm. The castle breathes again, empty, yet full of memory. Somewhere, a window creaks, a door sighs open, a single feather drifts down from a forgotten beam. The world sleeps, and in that sleep, the noble age still dreams, endlessly repeating itself in silence, like a song without end. The medieval bathhouse. Evening comes softly over the town. The air carries the scent of wood smoke, bread, and the faint sweetness of damp herbs. Lanterns bloom along the narrow streets one by one until the cobblestones gleam like polished bone. Behind a row of low-roofed houses stands a building half in shadow, half in gold light. Its windows glow, its doors breathe warm mist into the night. This is the bathhouse, the heart of medieval rest, the meeting place of water, warmth, and weary souls. To step inside is to leave the outside world behind. The air grows thick and fragrant, a slow dance of steam and rosemary. Candles line the walls, their flames bending as though softened by the heat. Every sound is softened here. Footsteps, whispers, the drip of water from ceiling to stone. The noise of the streets fades into a murmur, replaced by the gentle rhythm of pouring and sighing. The bathhouse is not merely a place to cleanse the body. It is a place to forget the weight of days, to slip into a quiet where words matter less than breath. People from all walks of life gather here. Merchants loosen their belts and laugh more freely than in the marketplace. Craftsmen soak their hands raw from labor until the ache leaves their bones. Even the lower nobles come, wrapped in linen, their rings tucked safely away. There are no thrones or titles in the steam, only skin and warmth and the shared relief of being human. In this rare space, the distances of the outside world dissolve, at least for a while. The butcher and the scholar, the widow and the sailor, all float in the same haze of comfort. The bathhouse itself is a small kingdom of rooms. Each one has its own temperature, its own music of dripping and sighing. In the first chamber, the air is cool and fragrant. Wooden benches line the walls, and bowls of scented water sit waiting for hands to dip and faces to wash. It is here that people begin, removing dust, loosening collars, letting the day slide off like a cloak. Further inside lies the warm room, where the heat seeps deep into the skin. The walls gleam with moisture, and the air hums faintly with the breath of 100 candles. Conversations slow, voices deepen, and time seems to drift sideways. Beyond that, in the heart of the bathhouse, is the hot room. It glows like the inside of a shell, lit by oil lamps suspended from low beams. The air trembles with heat. Steam curls around the body like silk. Water splashes softly as people move, slow and unhurried. Wooden tubs brim with warmth, their surfaces glinting gold in the flickering light. Attendants move silently among them, carrying trays of fruit, wine, and small dishes balanced on floating boards. Here, indulgence is quiet, without boast or spectacle. Pleasure exists in stillness, in the sigh that escapes when the muscles finally loosen, in the moment when thought itself melts into air. The fragrance of the place is a story of its own, a careful blend of herbs and oils, lavender for calm, rosemary for memory, mint for the heart. Sprigs hang from the beams, their scent released slowly by the heat. The water is not just water, it is steeped in petals, in crushed leaves, in the faint memory of forests and gardens. Some say that a skilled bath attendant could read a person's fatigue by their scent, choosing the blend that soothed the soul as much as the skin. In one corner, laughter drifts like bubbles rising from a spring. Friends share stories of the market, travelers describe faraway cities, and lovers speak softly behind screens of steam. Here, conversation moves gently, never rushed, never loud, as if words themselves must respect the air. In another room, a man plays a lute, its low notes weaving through the sound of dripping water. Music belongs naturally in this place. It fills the spaces between silence without breaking them. There are moments, too, of solitude. A woman sits alone in a pool of light, eyes half closed, her hands floating just beneath the surface. Around her, the world softens. Faces blur, time stretches, breath and water become the same. For her, this is prayer, not to saints or gods, but to stillness itself, to the idea that somewhere beneath the noise of life, peace still waits, patient and unchanging. Outside, the cold night presses against the walls, but inside, warmth reigns. Drops slide down the stone, gathering into rivulets that shimmer like veins of silver. The floor glows faintly in the candlelight, reflecting the slow motion of bodies, the drift of steam, the occasional sparkle of a ring forgotten on a ledge. It feels eternal, this world of water, as if it has existed forever and will continue long after the noise of cities has faded. When people leave, they do so reluctantly. Towels wrap around shoulders, hair drips softly down backs, and footsteps echo on the damp floor. At the door, the air of the outside world rushes in, sharp, cold, full of noise. For a moment, the returning travelers stand between two worlds, reluctant to choose. Then the door closes, and the bathhouse keeps its warmth to itself. Inside, the attendants clean and refill, fold linens, light new candles. The water continues to steam as though no one had left at all. To the medieval mind, the bathhouse was more than a luxury. It was a rhythm, part of the week, part of the season, part of life itself. People came not just to wash, but to reconnect, to share food, to exchange gossip, to trade small kindnesses that kept the community whole. Within those walls, people remembered what it meant to be close, to be equal, to be human. The warmth was not only in the water, but in the nearness of others. A comfort that could not be carried home, but lingered in the heart long after the skin cooled. The ritual of warmth and decline. The rhythm of the bathhouse was almost sacred. People came not by command but by instinct, the way rivers return to the sea. Some arrived with laughter, others in silence, all carrying the invisible dust of their days. The attendants welcomed them with gentle nods, hands scented with oil, voices kept soft to preserve the calm. There was no rush here, no schedule measured by bells or commerce. Time in the bathhouse belonged to no one. It stretched and folded like the steam itself, forming a world inside a world. To bathe was an art, a ritual of restoration. In the warm room, a man might sit for an hour, eyes closed, hands resting on his knees, his breath aligning with the quiet drip of water nearby. A woman might comb her hair slowly, each stroke unweaving the thoughts of the day. Friends shared stories in low voices, their words dissolving into mist. Lovers met behind veils of steam, where glances meant more than touch. Every act within these walls, from washing to whispering, followed an old rhythm that needed no rule book, only memory. The attendants worked with the care of priests. They filled copper basins, stirred herbs into the water, pressed linen towels into waiting hands. Their movements were deliberate, measured, almost ceremonial. They understood what the regulars sought, not simply cleanliness, but release. The bathhouse offered a rare gift, the permission to be unguarded, to step out of one's armor and exist without weight. Even the humblest laborer could feel for a brief while like a king of his own stillness. It was said that a good bath could heal more than the body. Physicians, philosophers, and monks all wrote about the power of warm water, how it soothed the humours, balanced the soul, and restored the gentle temper of the heart. Bathhouses were called balnea, and though they were made of wood and stone, many believed they were built upon an invisible foundation of mercy. People came to wash, but they left lighter, as if their thoughts had been rinsed as well. Meals were often shared between baths. Small trays floated on the surface of the pools, carrying bread, cheese, or fruit. Cups of wine passed quietly from hand to hand. The water rippled softly as people reached, ate, laughed. The act of dining, while half submerged in warmth, felt dreamlike, part feast, part prayer. The sound of spoons tapping gently against bowls, the smell of herbs mingled with wine and candle smoke, the sight of faces softened by steam, all blended into a peace that no church could entirely match. For a time, bathhouses thrived across Europe. In the cities of Germany and France, their roofs rose high and domed, with small glass windows that caught the sun. In England, the bathkeepers were respected, their establishments places of health and civility. In Italy, the tradition stretched back to Rome, its baths inheriting the elegance of an older world. Everywhere, the public bath was both a necessity and a comfort, a place where dirt met water and the self met silence. But peace, like warmth, is fragile. It cannot be held forever. When the plague came, the great darkness that would later be called the Black Death, it entered through touch, breath, and fear. The same closeness that once healed now terrified. Whispers spread faster than disease, that steam carried sickness, that shared water was a cradle for death, that even the air in the bathhouses had turned poisonous. The doors that had once been open to all began to close. The laughter, the soft murmur of voices, the music of dripping water, all fell silent. At first, people tried to deny it. Some bath-keepers burned stronger herbs, filled the air with rosemary and sage, hoping to drive away invisible danger. Others prayed at the door before entering, or dipped crosses into the pools as protection. But the fear was heavier than reason. Each week brought new rumors, a family stricken after a visit, a town emptied, a street sealed. The bathhouses that had once been symbols of vitality became symbols of contagion. Soon the laws followed the whispers. In city after city, edicts were read aloud. Bathhouses were to be closed until further notice. The public was urged to avoid communal washing, to purify themselves with dry cloth or vinegar instead. The steamy warmth that had once meant life now meant peril. The attendants who had once been healers became outcasts, their craft turned suspect overnight. In the streets, people crossed themselves when passing an abandoned bathhouse, as though the building itself could breathe illness. The silence that followed was strange and heavy. Without the bathhouses, the rhythm of life lost one of its softer beats. People grew apart in subtle ways. Friends met less often, neighbors exchanged fewer words. The easy closeness that came with shared water disappeared, replaced by a careful distance. Cleanliness became private, secret, almost suspicious. The idea of gathering for pleasure seemed suddenly dangerous. The world cooled not just in body but in spirit. And yet, some still remembered. In quiet corners of towns, a few bathhouses remained, half hidden, half forbidden. The desperate and the faithful returned to them, whispering that warmth was not a sin, that comfort could not be cursed. They lit their candles, boiled their water, and gathered again in defiance of fear. Within those small pockets of steam, humanity persisted. People still bathed, still spoke softly to one another, still sought peace in the only way they knew. But gradually, as generations passed, the bathhouses disappeared. Their stones were taken for new buildings, their pools dried and filled with dust. The laughter that had once lived inside them drifted into legend. In paintings and manuscripts they survived only as images: women with towels, men in wooden tubs, a servant carrying wine through steam. The real warmth was gone, replaced by memory. Still, the idea of them remained, lingering like a faint fragrance long after the flower had fallen. To the old people who remembered, the bathhouse was not merely a place. It was a feeling of being cleansed, yes, but also connected, unburdened, seen. It was the sound of a familiar voice through mist, the comfort of proximity without demand. It was the understanding that for a little while the world could be gentle. The vanishing warmth. After the closures, towns grew quieter, but not in the peaceful way they once had been. The air itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the familiar hum of steam and voices that would never return. The bathhouses stood dark for a time, their windows blackened with soot, their doors chained shut, until neglect began its slow and certain work. Roof tiles loosened, beams warped with moisture, ivy crept across the walls. What had been the center of comfort became a hollow shape, echoing with the faint memory of laughter. The people did not talk about it much. In times of fear, the mind learns to forget what once gave joy. And yet something was missing, something quieter than a ritual, deeper than a routine. The loss could not be named because it had no single form. It lived in the spaces between people, in the way hands hesitated to touch, in the way voices faltered before greeting, in the way neighbors passed one another with downcast eyes. The disappearance of the bathhouses was not just the end of bathing, it was the end of closeness. Those who remembered spoke of it like a dream. The old women would tell stories by the hearth about evenings wrapped in mist, about the warmth that smelled of rosemary and oil, about floating trays of food and candlelight that turned the air golden. Their grandchildren listened, wide-eyed, trying to imagine such abundance, such softness. To them, water was for work, not wonder. The thought of bathing beside strangers felt foreign, even sinful. Time had changed the meaning of comfort. Cleanliness, once communal, became solitary. People washed in basins at home, quickly, quietly, without joy. The sound of water no longer meant rest, but duty. In some towns, even the wells were approached with suspicion, as if the earth itself might be untrustworthy. Streets that had once smelled of herbs and steam now carried the scent of smoke and tallow. The rhythm of life lost one of its gentlest notes, and no one quite realized until it was gone how much warmth depended on proximity. The nobles in their stone estates built private baths, small and cautious. They used marble instead of wood, perfumed oil instead of shared water. To bathe became a privilege again, a quiet, hidden ritual behind locked doors. The public was left with rivers, with buckets, with memories. The gap between classes widened as the warmth that once united them cooled into separation. The simple equality of the bathhouse, where merchants and peasants had shared the same pool, became another relic of a forgotten age. But some remnants survived in the countryside, far from the reach of city laws. In certain valleys, small bathhouses continued in secret. Travelers, shepherds, and midwives used them quietly, lighting fires beneath copper basins, whispering blessings over the water. They believed that warmth could still heal what fear had broken. Sometimes, in the dead of night, One might see a column of steam rising through the trees, pale against the stars. It was the last breath of a fading world, a fragile defiance against coldness. As centuries passed, the ruins remained. In winter, snow gathered on the broken roofs. In summer, wildflowers grew through cracks in the stone. The wind carried faint echoes, not of words, but of sensations. If one stood still enough, it was said, you could almost hear the drop of water against a basin, the rustle of a towel, the faint note of a lute. The world forgets quickly, but stone remembers differently. In art and poetry, the bathhouse lived on. Illuminated manuscript showed scenes of bathing, women smiling beside pools, men reclining in wooden tubs, servants pouring water from bronze jugs. The colors were warm, the gestures serene. Yet behind the beauty, a shadow lingered. The knowledge that these images belonged to a world that no longer existed. The artists painted not what they saw, but what they longed to remember. And so as Europe moved into new centuries, the culture of bathing remained like an ember beneath ash. In private homes, people built small rooms of steam. In monasteries, water rituals survived as acts of purification. The idea of warmth, of being made whole through cleansing, refused to die. It waited patient beneath the changing skin of the world. Long after the Black Death had passed, people began to rediscover what had been lost. The fear that had closed the bathhouses slowly eased, replaced by curiosity, then nostalgia. In some towns, new houses of water appeared. Smaller, quieter, but built with the same reverence for stillness. They were not quite the same. The laughter did not echo as freely, the air did not smell as sweet. But something of the old peace returned, like a song remembered after many years. By then the old generation was gone. No one alive could recall the first warmth of shared water. But their stories had traveled, softened, and survived. The bathhouse became legend, a symbol of gentler times when people believed that the body and spirit could be washed clean together. Travelers spoke of ruins where ghosts still gathered, where steam rose on cold mornings even without fire. Some said it was only mist, others said it was memory. Either way, it comforted those who saw it. In a way, the bathhouse never belonged to history alone. It belonged to the part of humanity that craves connection, the longing to sit beside another soul in silence, to feel the same warmth, to remember that separation is not our natural state. The water had been real, but its true gift had always been invisible, a reminder that peace can be shared. If you walk through old towns today, you might still find a door half buried, a wall curved like the inside of a shell, a floor that once held water. Step closer, and the air will smell faintly of damp stone. Run your hand along the wall, and the chill will seem to hum beneath your skin. In that moment, you are closer to them. The merchants, the lovers, the weary travelers who once gathered in the same warmth. Their breath has long since vanished, but their stillness remains. The story of the medieval bathhouse is not about luxury, nor even about hygiene. It is about the tenderness of being human together, of sharing warmth, not because one must, but because one can. Its loss was more than architectural, it was emotional, the slow fading of intimacy from daily life. When the baths died, something inside people withdrew, curling inward like a flame denied air. And yet, what vanished also left behind a seed, a memory of gentleness that waits in all of us. So tonight, as the world grows quiet again and the air cools, imagine the water warming around you. Imagine the glow of candles through steam, the low hum of conversation, the sound of water meeting skin. Imagine that soft sigh that rises when the body forgets its burdens. The bathhouse may be gone, but the calm it offered still lives in the spaces we make for peace. In a deep breath, in a shared silence, in the quiet kindness between people who remember, even faintly, what it means to be warm together. The Silk Road. The night opens wide above the desert, a sheet of indigo scattered with faint dusts of stars. The air is dry and endless, carrying the hush of distance. In that vast silence, a sound begins, the slow jingle of harness bells, the padded rhythm of hooves against sand. A caravan is moving, its outline shimmers against the horizon, half real, half imagined. Camels sway like ships on a shallow tide, their shadows stretching long beneath the moon. Men walk beside them, wrapped in cloth and patience, faces hidden except for the glint of eyes. They have been walking for days, perhaps weeks. The road before them is not made of stone, but of memory. A path traced by generations who came before, linking oceans to mountains, empires to oases, hearts to distant dreams. This is the Silk Road, not a single road, not even a single place, but a living thread that weaves across half the world. It begins in the east, where mulberry trees grow thick and silkworms spin their secret work, and it winds through deserts, valleys, and cities that breathe dust and incense. It crosses the edges of kingdoms and the spaces between languages. It carries more than trade, it carries connection. Every footprint here is part of a longer story, one of movement, exchange, and quiet endurance. At dawn, the caravan halts near an oasis. Water glints between palms, reflecting a pale sky just beginning to turn gold. The camels kneel, groaning softly, and the traders set down their loads. Rolls of silk, jars of oil, bundles of spice wrapped in linen. The smell of cinnamon and myrrh fills the air, mingling with smoke from a small fire. Tea boils slowly. The men sit in a circle, passing cups, watching the steam rise in thin, forgiving lines. No one speaks much. Words, like water, are precious out here. The silence is not emptiness, but understanding. A shared rhythm between strangers, bound by the same horizon. As the sun climbs, the air shimmers with heat. The sand burns bright, almost white, and the world becomes a mirror. In that glare, everything slows. Time loses its edges. The desert has no sense of hurry. It teaches patience by example. Each dune looks like the last, yet each is new. Travelers learn to trust the smallest signs. A cluster of dark rocks, the direction of the wind, the color of the evening light. The road, invisible yet certain, exists only through faith and repetition. By twilight, they reach a caravanserai, a fortress of rest in a landscape of motion. Thick walls rise from the plain, square and steady, their gates wide enough for camels to enter 2 by 2. Inside, the air cools at once. The courtyard smells of hay and dust, of sweat and spices, of 100 journeys meeting in one breath. Lanterns flicker along the arches. Merchants unpack their goods, spreading cloth over wooden stalls, silk that glows like water, lapis stones from Afghanistan, glass beads from Rome, ivory combs, carved jade, scrolls of writing. Here, trade is not chaos but choreography, a slow negotiation of gestures and glances, a language older than speech. In the center of the courtyard, water glimmers in a stone basin. A boy refills cups, carrying them to travelers who sit against the walls. They speak in many tongues, Persian, Chinese, Arabic, Greek, yet somehow they understand one another. A raised eyebrow, a nod, the tilt of a hand, trade is translation through presence. One man offers silk from Chang'an, another weighs it with a measure of gold coins stamped with Latin letters. A third shows a pouch of saffron, its scent bright as sunlight. Around them, The air hums softly with conversation, laughter, and the faint echo of songs sung in different keys. The Silk Road was never just a marketplace, it was a river of ideas. Along with goods came stories of gods, of cities, of ways to understand the sky. Buddhist monks traveled westward carrying scriptures wrapped in cloth, their sandals worn thin from dust. In return, Islamic scholars rode east bringing astronomy, medicine, and poetry. Christian traders carried icons in their packs, small painted faces that glowed with faith. Each meeting along the road was an exchange of more than objects. It was an exchange of possibility. The world, once distant, began to know itself. Some nights, after the trading ended and the fires dimmed, a traveler would unroll a mat and sit beneath the stars. He might look toward home, a city far beyond the dunes, and feel both near and far at once. The road blurred the meaning of belonging. Here, everyone was a visitor, and every destination a pause. In the language of the Silk Road, even rest was temporary. The wind carried whispers of 1,000 tongues, and the constellations were the only companions that stayed the same. Farther west, the road climbed into mountains where snow replaced sand. The air there was sharp, thin, edged with the scent of pine. Travelers wrapped themselves in wool, their breath forming small clouds as they crossed narrow passes. Below, rivers shimmered like threads of glass, and the silence was immense, not the silence of emptiness, but of scale. In those heights, sound moved slowly. A bell might ring, and its echo would wander for miles before fading. Yet even here, far from cities and kings, traces of the Silk Road lingered, carved stones marking old routes, prayer flags trembling in the wind, smoke from a hearth waiting for strangers. Down from the mountains, the road wound into cities that never slept. Samarkand, Bukhara, Kashgar. Their names glimmered like jewels on the map of the world. Their streets smelled of fruit and dust, their markets crowded with color. In Samarkand, the domes shone turquoise against the sky, and poets compared them to heaven. In Bukhara, water ran through tiled courtyards where scholars debated the motion of stars. In Kashgar, the bazaar stretched like a labyrinth of sound, the clang of metal, the murmur of bargaining, the soft rustle of fabric being weighed by hand. At night, music drifted from open courtyards. Drums beat slow and steady, flutes answered like voices calling across distance. Dancers moved through lamplight, their shadows long against the walls. The songs changed from city to city, yet they all shared something. The rhythm of travel, the pull of horizon, the heartbeat of the road itself. Beyond the great cities lay the western deserts where heat and wind returned. Here the road split into branches, one running north toward the steppes, another south toward Persia and the sea. Each turn led to new dangers, storms, thieves, sickness. Yet the caravans kept moving, drawn by the simple truth that the world was larger than fear. Alongside silk and spice now traveled new cargo, words written on parchment, cures carried in glass, ideas wrapped in belief. The Silk Road had become an artery through which civilizations breathed. But every pulse carries risk. What flowed one way did not always return the same. Diseases traveled with the traders, small and unseen, riding in breath, in fabric, in the fur of animals. The same road that carried silk to Rome carried plague to China. The same ships that sailed from Alexandria with glass and grain returned with fever. The network of connection so carefully woven became the path of contagion. Empires rose and fell in rhythm with these invisible exchanges. The road gave, and the road took away. Even so, it endured. When one empire broke, another inherited the dust. When war closed one route, a new path opened through the hills. The Silk Road was not made by rulers but by motion itself, by the footsteps of countless travelers whose names no one recorded. For every merchant remembered, there were hundreds who vanished into the dunes, leaving only a faint line of footprints swallowed by wind. Yet their passing shaped the world. Over centuries, the trade shifted toward the sea. Ships grew larger, faster, safer. The land routes thinned, their stations emptying, their walls crumbling back into sand. Caravanserais became ruins, their courtyards filled with grass. But the idea of the road remained, the notion that distant lives could touch, that a piece of cloth from one shore could warm a body on another. The Silk Road had done its work. It had proven that connection was possible. Now, if you travel those lands, the traces are faint but not gone. The wind still follows the same paths, whispering through valleys where camels once knelt. The bones of caravan towns lie beneath modern cities, their foundations hum with old memory. In the deserts of Central Asia, small stones still glint where fire once burned. Step carefully and you may find a fragment of pottery, the edge of a coin, a thread of fabric turned to dust. Touch it, and you touch everyone who ever walked that long road. The Silk Road lives now not in sand or map, but in the weave of human story. The silk has turned to paper, the spice to ink, but the purpose is the same: to cross distance, to share, to remind. When we speak across languages, when we trade ideas, when we listen to one another with quiet curiosity, we follow the same invisible path. The caravans are gone, but the journey continues. As night returns over the desert, the last traveler pauses beside a dying fire. The stars bloom again, countless and near. He hears the faint echo of bells somewhere in the dark. Perhaps memory, perhaps wind. The road ahead is endless, but he is not alone. The footprints of all who came before are there, guiding him softly forward. The Silk Road, ancient and eternal, breathes through him now, through you, through everyone who dreams of distance, yet finds peace in connection. He exhales, the air warm against the cool night. The fire fades to ash. In the silence that follows, the world feels vast but gentle, stitched together by unseen threads. And as sleep comes, it feels like walking, slowly, endlessly, along that quiet road beneath the stars. The quiet work of history. The night begins softly. The world exhales and the noise of centuries fades into a low hum beneath the skin. In that hush, the past feels close again, not as a story of kings and crowns, but as the quiet rhythm of work. Behind every empire, every monument, every glittering moment of triumph, there were hands that shaped, lifted, cleaned, cooked, built, and buried. They were the ones who kept the fires burning and the doors open, the ones who never appeared in the records. Tonight, they return, not as heroes or martyrs, but as what they always were. People who did their jobs and went home tired. History, when told too loudly, forgets the small sounds that made it possible. It forgets the scrape of iron, the rustle of linen, the sigh after a long day. The story of the medieval world is not only one of kings, wars, and plagues. It is the story of those who carried the weight of time quietly. The torturer in his dim chamber, the cook stirring a pot for noble guests, the servant polishing the goblet no one would remember, the bath attendant refilling water until dawn, the merchant leading camels through sand until his shadow vanished into horizon. None of them asked to be remembered, and yet without them, the great world above would have stopped turning. The torturer worked where light did not reach. His hands were steady, his eyes unreadable. He did not see himself as cruel, only necessary. The instruments of his craft were kept clean, their order precise. Pain was his arithmetic, measured, controlled, predictable. He did not hate, nor did he enjoy. He simply followed instructions, the way a mason lays stones or a tailor cuts cloth. When his day ended, he scrubbed the floor, locked the door, and climbed the stairs to the quiet above. Outside, life continued. Bells ringing, children laughing, bread baking, and no one spoke his name. His silence was part of the order that kept the city calm. Above him, the cooks and stewards prepared feasts for the nobles. They moved through smoke and heat, balancing trays, tasting broths, carving meat into symmetry. A noble banquet looked effortless, but behind the curtain was chaos shaped by discipline. The servants whispered, the musicians tuned, the dogs waited for scraps. Gold gleamed on the table while sweat rolled down the backs of those who had set it. For a few hours, the world looked magnificent. Then, when the candles burned low, they cleaned the bones, scraped the wax, washed the plates, and began again. The feast would end, the laughter would fade, but the work would continue, invisible and endless. Beyond the castle walls in the heart of the town, the bathhouse breathed warmth into the cold. There, the people met as equals, rich and poor, merchant and beggar, wrapped in steam instead of status. They shared water, food, and silence. For a brief hour, the world softened, but when fear arrived in the form of plague, that softness vanished. Doors closed, fires died, and the air grew heavy with suspicion. The attendants, once healers of fatigue, became ghosts of contagion. Yet, even after the baths were forbidden, a few still boiled water in secret, believing that warmth was not sin, and that comfort could not be wrong. In the end, they too disappeared, leaving behind only the scent of herbs and the memory of shared rest. Farther east, the merchants traced the long road of silk. They crossed deserts and mountains, carrying cloth, salt, glass, and stories. Their lives were made of movement, days under blinding sun, nights beneath unbroken stars. They spoke many tongues and trusted none. Every step they took tied one civilization to another. The Silk Road was not built by kings or maps, it was built by the feet of traders who did not know they were changing the world. When one of them fell ill or was lost to the wind, the caravan moved on. His goods would be divided, his name forgotten. But his footsteps would remain, faint yet unbroken, pressed into the dust of the world's longest conversation. These were the people history forgot. The torturer who knew how bones turned, the servant who knew how light fell on silver, the bathkeeper who understood the weight of silence, the merchant who followed stars across emptiness. They left no monuments, no portraits, no epitaphs. They did not ask for memory, they asked only for sleep. But their absence in the record is not proof of their insignificance, it is proof of their constancy. They were the gears beneath the clock face, turning unseen but essential. Their reward was endurance itself. To look back at them is to look at the hidden half of civilization, the part that did not shout but whispered. History often belongs to those who claimed it with banners and coins, yet its foundation rests on those who claimed nothing. They endured the weight of orders, of repetition, of anonymity. They are the quiet backbone of every age. And though we do not know their names, their rhythm is familiar. It is the sound of our own lives, the steady hum of work that no one applauds but everyone depends upon. The tone of their story is not tragic, it is human. There is even a strange tenderness in their invisibility. To live without fame is to live freely within one's task. The torturer did his work because it was assigned. The cook stirred because the fire was warm and someone must eat. The servants swept because the hall must gleam before morning. Each action, however small, held the dignity of completion. They did not seek meaning beyond the work itself, and perhaps that, more than anything, is why they endure, not as villains or saints, but as echoes of patience. The Middle Ages are often painted as brutal, but within that brutality lived a fragile grace. It was not in the palaces or cathedrals, it was in the small gestures that no one wrote down. The hand that lifted a cup, the cloth that covered a wound, the whisper exchanged at dusk. The ordinary made the extraordinary possible. For every speech of a king, there were 100 voices arranging the stage, lighting the candles, holding the curtain. The quiet people of history did not ask for gratitude, but they deserve it, not for their suffering, but for their steadiness. As the centuries passed, their traces blurred. Tools rusted, letters faded, stones wore smooth. But when you walk through an old town at night, you can still feel them. In the creak of a door, in the smell of wood smoke, in the hush that lingers where walls have seen too much. The world we live in is their monument, though we do not call it that. Every paved street, every recipe, every habit of politeness carries their fingerprints. They kept the world ordinary so that it could continue. The narrator's voice, if you listen closely, does not mourn them. It smiles a little, the way one smiles at something sad but necessary. There is irony here, yes, but it is gentle. To tell their story is to respect their silence, not to break it. The humor is small, human, a way of saying that even sorrow can be bearable when told softly. The torturer, the cook, the servant, the bather, the merchant, they were not symbols, not lessons, just people who lived inside the machinery of time. Their world was heavy, their work unending, and yet they endured it with a kind of weary grace. No monuments, the voice might say, no stone markers, only the decent silence and the work that must go on. That sentence could have been carved into the wall of any century. It is the truest prayer of survival that even when memory fades, the act of doing remains. The medieval world, for all its cruelty, understood something we often forget, that the measure of a life is not in applause but in persistence. From the dungeons to the banquets, from the steamy baths to the endless roads, the story is the same. People working quietly to hold the world together. Their names did not echo, but their rhythm did. It passed through generations, through wars and winters, through ages of faith and doubt. It became the pulse of civilization itself. Steady, invisible, enduring. The video that tells their story does not seek pity. It seeks recognition, a reminder that history's grandeur is built from human smallness. When the camera drifts through the dim light of a torture chamber, it does not linger on cruelty but on order. When it moves across a noble feast, it does not follow the laughter but the hands refilling cups. When it enters the bathhouse, it finds not sin but steam rising like forgiveness. When it follows the merchants across the desert, it listens not for glory but for the sound of footsteps against sand. Every scene breathes the same truth, that life continues quietly, regardless of who is watching. By the time the story ends, the listener feels not sorrow but calm, as though history, stripped of spectacle, reveals something honest and kind. The torturer is gone, the cooks are gone, the servants are gone, the merchants are gone, but the world remains. Warm, imperfect, still turning. Their labor, invisible yet unbroken, has become the hum beneath our own. Every time we work, rest, wash, share a meal, or carry a burden without praise, we repeat their rhythm. So tonight, as the light dims and the mind drifts towards sleep, remember them. not as shadows but as companions in the long work of being human. The forgotten of history are never truly gone. They are the breath within the silence, the warmth behind every ordinary act. The world they built still holds us, and as we close our eyes, we join them, the quiet workers of time, keeping everything moving, softly, endlessly, until morning comes again. Close your eyes, let the noise of the day dissolve into distance. Feel the weight of your body sink gently into the bed, as if the earth itself were holding you steady. The air around you is soft and patient. Every breath you take draws calm a little deeper into your chest. The rhythm of the world slows to match your heartbeat. Steady, quiet, kind. Whatever you carried today can rest now. The thoughts that chased you can drift away like clouds moving across an evening sky. The room darkens, but it is a comforting dark, the kind that hums with safety. Somewhere, faintly, the story continues. Voices from another time, gentle footsteps, the whisper of history passing by. You don't need to follow. You only need to listen and let it lull you. Your hands grow warm, your shoulders loosen, your breath deepens. The body remembers how to rest. The mind learns to float. You are no longer waiting for sleep. You are already within it, carried softly by the quiet rhythm of the night. The story goes on without you, and that is enough. Rest now. The world will wait.